All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So, Brother Jim's session just a second ago, looked at Psalm 8 and talked about how Jesus is the true, um, he's the one who succeeded where Adam failed, okay, and he is serves as the merciful and faithful high priest for his people. And he ended with a question, and actually wanted to just go ahead and start with that question and ask the question. So this was his question. If Christ has truly entered into our condition, if he has shared in our suffering, has faced temptation, and delivered us from the fear of death, then what does that mean for how believers experience fear, anxiety, and trials today? So what do y'all think? How does that affect the way we live and experience fear and anxiety and our trials? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else? What do y'all think?
I'll go one further and say, if you think you are experiencing something unique, it has a profound effect on you. But if you
Yeah.
know others have gone through it before you,
Yeah.
it changes your perspective. Like, for example, I'll give you an example in the military. When you go through Hell Week, you say, I can't do this. And
Right.
then you remember, wait a minute,
There have been
lots of people.
hundreds of thousands of people, I mean, I don't know how many, have gone through this before, and they haven't died.
And they may.
Right.
That means I can too.
Yeah.
One of my greatest fears, I was going to tell you, I hate roller coasters. And I get in line, and I'm looking around, and I see 7 and 8-year-old kids, girls, getting on the roller coaster. And I say to myself, do I really want to step out of line when this 8-year-old girl is going to get on? My point is, it does make a difference when you've seen other people do it ahead of you. And knowing that Christ not only has done it but conquered it
Right.
and changed it forever, that changes me.
Anything else? Well, so let me ask you this. Well, go ahead.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Yes, it's not like the person riding the roller coaster for themselves. Christ did it for me.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's, like you say, it's very personal. And that's, I mean, to me, that's more than spectacular.
Yeah.
That's something,
Right.
a paradigm shifting thought.
Well, so because let me ask you this. So when you are facing anxiety or whatever it is, what is your natural instinct? Is it to bring it to God? Is it to suppress it? Seek answers? What's your natural instinct when you experience those things?
Fix it.
Yeah.
I got it.
Right.
Give me a minute.
Or for me, like just try to suppress, just try to ignore it. Just try to. But what does that usually do? What? Yeah, hide from it or whatever. Yeah, it usually makes it worse. Fixing it usually makes it worse, right? And that's my point, is that whatever we try to do, unless we are bringing it to God in prayer, we're making it worse, right? But the question, that's an important question, and we have to ask it because it moves us from doctrine into real life. So it's not just, I mean, what Brother Jim was talking about was immensely important. We have to understand the doctrine behind it. But then we also have to understand, how does it affect my everyday life? How does it affect the way that I live on Monday morning? How does it affect the way that I respond when we experience trials and anxiety and fear and all of those things? Because it's not what good is it to have it up here when it doesn't affect the way that we live? Yeah. Right. And so, it's one thing to say that Jesus sympathizes with our weaknesses as humans, but it's another thing to live as if it's true, right? And actually bringing our fears to the throne of grace, rather than just trying to, fix it or hide it or whatever the case may be, whatever we try to do. That when we understand that Christ, went through those things, he suffered, he sympathizes with us, it actually helps us to remember that we don't have to take care of it. We don't have to suppress it. And so we're not actually, this isn't a departure from theology. All right, this isn't. Don't think that like, okay, his is the theological section and mine's the, the opposite. It's not moving away from theology. It is. It's actually deepening our theology, right? Because it's moving it into the realm of real life. It's allowing it to permeate our hearts and our minds, and then our hearts, I guess, really. And so. So I want us to really know who Christ is, especially in relation to our fear and our anxiety, and then what we do with it. All right, so let's look at just the Christ's sympathy. We looked at this in the previous session, but Hebrews 2:17 through 18. I'll read that again. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in all things, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For since he himself was tempted in that which he suffered, he is able to come to the aid of those who are tempted. And then chapter 4, verse 15, we'll skip ahead for a little bit, but he says, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin." All right, so it says that we have a merciful and faithful high priest. And he was tempted in that which it was suffered, and he came to the aid of those who were tempted, and he sympathizes with our weakness. All right, so that word sympathize actually is a compound word. All right, and it's built from two words. And I'm not going to go into the Greek because I don't know it as well as Brother Jim does. I rely on other people, but it's actually it's a word that means with or together, and then the other one is to suffer, to experience. All right, so it literally means to suffer with. All right, so it's to sympathize or to feel something together, or to share that experience. Like he was talking about with Alyssa and Jim. They have a connection because they have shared experiences, right? And so it's used here, and then also in Hebrews 10:34, where the author of Hebrews he's commending the readers for their solidarity with other imprisoned believers, and he uses the word to describe what Christ does toward us as what he commended the community for doing toward one another. So, in other words, Christ's sympathy is the model and the source of their sympathy. All right, so Christ doesn't sympathize with our weakness in the way that like a doctor would sympathize with a patient. How would doctors might, you go to the doctor, you tell them, what's wrong, and what does the doctor do? He's going to, okay, I'm sorry that you're feeling that way, right? Here's a prescription. Go take this for, every morning for the next 2 weeks, and, hopefully things will be better. He actually sympathizes as a fellow sufferer sympathizes. As one who has a shared experience. He went through the same sufferings that we suffer through. He went through the same temptations that we are tempted with. Right? So it's not just like us coming to Jesus and going, hey, I'm feeling this way. And Jesus is like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you feel that way. He said, like, Brother Jim, I think, I can't remember exactly what you said in the previous session, but you said something to the effect of, he says, I know what you've been going through. Like, I'm not just hearing you. Like, I'm sympathizing with you because I've been there. I've experienced it. I've gone through it. Because it says that he was tempted in all things as we were. All right, so, and that's intentional. That's not, accidental language. And it's also not just kind of ambiguous. The author is saying that, or the author does not qualify it to a category of temptation. He doesn't say that he was tempted in some things, or that he was tempted in spiritual things. He says that he was tempted in all things. All right, so what does that mean? What did Christ experience? Well, he experienced a lot. All right, let's walk through it. So, what did Jesus experience in the Garden of Gethsemane? Yeah, anxiety, fear. He was literally sweating drops of blood. And he even said, Father, if it be your will, let this cup pass from me, but yet not my will, but yours be done. So anxiety over what, too? So there's kind of a twofold. What was the kind? He knew he was about to die, or not just die, but suffer and die. Suffer a horrendous experience. Right, for nothing he had done. Right. So he was experiencing anxiety over the fear of the loss of his life and the pain and the suffering he was going to experience. Okay. What about the wilderness? The temptation in the wilderness. What?
Physical hunger.
Yeah. Physical hunger, physical thirst, but then also what? Yeah. So it was the temptation to take the easy road. If you worship me, everything you see here will belong to you. What was he really saying? Did Satan, what was he really tempting him? In other words, Jesus, if you'll bow down before me and worship me, you won't have to go through what you're about to have to go. You won't have to go through that immense suffering and pain for the sake of a people who don't even, really, they've rejected him, right? All right, so he pressure to take for not only physical, right, but also the pressure to take the easy road. What about in Judas's denial, Peter's denial, the disciples? They fled, they scattered, right? So what did he experience there? Yeah, despair, betrayal, right? He had spent his whole ministry pouring into these people.
Ms. Michelle's right. She said a very important word.
Well, I didn't hear what you said.
Alone.
Okay, yeah.
That's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Isolation.
Right. Unanswered prayer. He prayed in the garden, let this cup pass from me. But yet not my will, but yours be done. So, there was that anguish that wasn't quenched, right? On the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? He just experienced, silent, just kind of almost feeling like God's not, okay, God, where are you? What's going on? Why have you forsaken me? And then also physical exhaustion, on the cross, just like he was in the wilderness. Social rejection. Yeah. At what point his family came to go get him? Because they were like, he's a little crazy, right? They literally came to go get Jesus because they thought he was, or they were saying, you are acting like you're crazy, right? So, his own family thought he was crazy. People were out to get him. People were out to kill him because of what he was doing. So, in other words, Jesus didn't just go through, social rejection for sharing the gospel. But, right. Right. Yeah. When Jesus was going into Jerusalem, what was he doing? When he was riding on the donkey in the triumphal entry, do you remember what he was doing? He was weeping over Jerusalem. So, yeah, I mean, he didn't just, feel a little tinge of, these things. It's kind of like, he wasn't like a little sampler, a platter of temptation. He experienced them at a deep level, and it affected him. So, the point that I'm trying to make is that he experienced temptation, but he didn't overcome it easily. Right? I mean, he was God, yes, but he was also human. And so, he overcame those things, but it cost him. And so, so his sinlessness didn't diminish or take away from his experience of temptation. Just because he was God, it doesn't minimize the temptation. If anything, it actually intensifies it. Because like Brother Jim was saying, I mean, he left his, like going back to Philippians 2, I mean, he left he didn't consider his equality with God as something to be used to his own advantage. Instead, he humbled himself, took on the form of a servant, came and, became obedient even to the point of death, right? So the fact that it was God himself who chose to do that actually really makes it intensified, right? And so, because, and here's the thing, I know, like, as Christians, and this is why I was talking earlier about just the moving from theology to life, all right? Because as Christians, sometimes we will want to reassure people in times of trouble. Let's just say somebody loses somebody that's very close to them. All right, and so what might you say to that person? Christ understands. But sometimes we just kind of say it quickly, and just that it just kind of, they kind of come across as cliche rather than like true help, right? Yeah, right. What? Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, just kind of like, just trust God in everything, just. Let go, let God, right. Yeah, just, I hate that saying. But anyway, so we got to slow down and understand that, and see that Christ's experiences and his understanding of our pain isn't, he didn't just observe it from a distance, right? And he actually walked into it. He felt its weight. And so, when somebody says to you that they feel like abandoned by God, I mean, as pastor, I hear this a lot. When somebody experiences the loss of, especially when it's a loss that's not really supposed to, like a child, somebody's child that dies. It's like that's not supposed to happen, right? We're supposed to outlive our kids. And so when somebody's child dies or their husband dies young, and they come and say, well, why is God punishing me? Why is God abandoned me? What's the response then? Well, some of the first things that we should consider is, like Christ, sympathize with that person. Yeah, and say, right. I understand those thoughts. I understand those. Absolutely, right. I know what it feels like to question or to feel abandoned, right. Yeah. Because the temptation, sometimes we just want to say something like, well, God understands. Does he understand? Yeah, he understands, but is that helpful? No. Well, maybe a little bit, but not really, right? So yeah, so what is helpful? I mean, that's a great thing, just to show that we understand, right? Now, we're not Jesus. We may not have gone through the exact same thing that person's gone through, but we can at least draw from other shared experiences and say, yeah, like, hey, I understand. Listen to sit and listen, rather than just trying to. One of the hardest things that I had to learn as pastor was how to just shut up and listen. And I remember the first time that I really had to learn that lesson was when I was down at First Baptist, and there was a grandmother at the church whose 5-year-old grandson drowned in a pool while the family was just, they were out having a good time, right? They just took their eyes off him for just a second. I mean, there's no neglect. They just took their eyes off him for a second. and he ended up drowning. And I had to go sit in the living room with a grieving mother and father, and I had to tell myself to just shut up and just listen and sit with them, just like Michelle was saying, because I knew that if I said anything, it was gonna be cliche. It was gonna be, Now eventually we got around to. I mean, I shared the gospel with them, shared the scripture with them. We got around to that, but didn't start with that, right? Said, just wanted to listen and understand her pain as a grieving mom who just lost her 5-year-old boy in a tragic accident, right? So and then we start talking about, well, okay, how do we respond, according to the scripture? So, yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, and two, Jesus, when he said on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's quoting from the Psalms, from Psalm 22, and it's a psalm. It's a prayer of lament. I mean, he was crying, right? Jesus was in pain, like he was suffering on the cross, and he cried out. Was he wrong to do that? Yeah, obviously the answer is no, right? But so my point is, if it was not wrong for Jesus to cry out to God in his pain and suffering, it's not wrong for us either. Right, he's the example. And so then I just had to sit down and cry with her for a little bit to sympathize with her. So in other words, Jesus' sympathy was my model for how to handle that situation. Just sympathize with her, right? And not just try to comfort her from a distance. And not from a distance, I don't mean like just calling on the phone or, sending an email. I mean, I'm saying, like, I didn't want to just come across as me sitting across the living room and bringing these cliches to her. So, and then it says that he's able to help. All right, so why is Christ able to help those who are tempted? Because he was tempted, right? And so he suffered. He knows what we're going through. And so he didn't just read about what we were going through. He didn't read it in a book or, see it on, TV documentary. He actually went through it, and he offers help. And that is the price of redemption. So he was his suffering qualified him to help. Going back to what it said earlier in Hebrews, and Brother Jim pointed this out in his, he had to go through these things. He had to go through these things. And the word for help here is another word that it combines a word that means to cry out and a word that means to run. And so it's actually a picture of somebody who hears a cry and runs to answer it. So he's not just, so Jesus, when it says that he's able to help, it doesn't just mean that he's just kind of like waiting for us to get there. It actually says that he hears our cry. It means that he hears our cry and he runs to answer it. Yeah, right. Yeah, like a first responder, right? They come to you. You don't call 911 and be like, and they be like, okay, so can you make it over to us in 5 minutes, right? They come to you, and they help. And so, when it says that he was tempted beyond all, tempted in all things as we were, and yet without sin, does the fact that he did not sin make his experience of temptation any less relatable? Okay, why not? I would agree, but yeah, why not? because then it becomes our model. Like Jim was saying earlier, his suffering, yeah, his even though he did all that without sin, doesn't mean that it's any less relatable for me. It actually means for me, it's actually more relatable because then he serves as the model. Now, that doesn't mean that we can go through all temptation in life without sinning, because we're all going to sin. But it does mean that we can find the way out. It says, when you're tempted, look for the way out. The problem is when we're tempted, we don't want to look for the way out. In all reality, I mean, we're saying, oh yeah, I want to escape this, but we're kind of like, yeah, okay, I had no choice. So we don't look for that way out, right? But because Jesus did it without sin, it becomes a model for us. We can go through these things, and like Hell Week. I mean, we can make it through this because Christ has done it before us, right? So, all right. So let's talk about the throne of grace. And so it says in chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. So again, we're going to kind of glimpse ahead. But therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. Now, I kind of touched on a lot of this morning. I didn't read this verse, but I kept referring to it. I don't know if you noticed. All right, so there are two therefores. All right, so we gotta remember look to see what they're there for. All right, so the first therefore is in verse 14, and he says, therefore, because we have a great high priest, hold fast to your confession. All right, so what is he addressing here? Is he just addressing like moral failure? I mean, that's one thing he's addressing, but like, is that the only thing he's addressing? No, because remember, who's he writing to? Well, in Hebrews, he's writing to save people, right? But especially those who were Jewish and being tempted to return to, right. So he's also addressing the temptation to just kind of let go and to drift away from Christ, right? To get away from the anchor, like we sang this morning in without Him at the end, without Him I would be drifting like a ship without a sail. That's exactly what we've been talking about on Sunday night. Sunday nights.
So what he's saying is like, hold fast to your confession. Like, these are the things that you say you believe. So hold fast to that. Don't be tempted. Don't be swayed to return to those kinds of things.
Hold fast to those things. Right, yeah, exactly.
Don't drift back.
Right.
Don't go back.
Stay the course. Like we talked about last week. Right, yeah, and like I talked about last week, that attentiveness, pay attention. Like, don't get so distracted that you drift without even realizing it, and you look up and you can't even find out where you drifted from because you're that far away. So stay the course, like hold fast to the confession. So the second therefore is in verse 16, and it says, because he sympathizes with our weaknesses, draw near with confidence. So both of these are exhorting us, they're encouraging us, and they're rooted in who Christ is. All right, so it's like that anchor, like we sang last week, I think. The Christ, the sure and steady anchor. Right, it's anchoring us in Christ, and so he's not asking his audience to do something like draw fast or hold fast or draw near. He's not asking him to do those things without first grounding it, anchoring it in realizing who Christ is and what He's done. That brings it back to Hebrews 1 and 2, where he's setting it up to say this is who Christ is. So he's not just saying do these things. He's saying do these things because we're anchored in Christ, because we're grounded in him. So we're not just doing them on our own strength. Yeah, we're doing it because Jesus is exalted above all things. Right? So
I think it's interesting that he points out, make sure that we understand. Jesus wasn't just a really great guy.
yeah, right.
A really great guy couldn't save me. But
Right.
he says, one who has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. Had he been tempted just one time that he did sin, that's what gives me
Mm-hmm.
it would have made him completely unqualified.
Right.
to
Everything,
save me.
right.
But since he didn't do that, he's not just a great guy,
Yep.
guy can't save me. But because he is who he is, that's what gives me that boldness.
Yep.
Because he really was tempted and never
Yeah.
sinned.
Right.
So he was the one who could save me.
So he's not telling us to summon up the courage to do something that we don't have. He's actually pointing us to a high priest as the grounds for our confidence, because he went through those things, yet was without sin. Exactly. And then he talks about the throne, so we can approach the throne of grace. All right, so what is a throne? It represents the seat of sovereignty, power, authority, right? Could you just approach the throne in a kingdom? I'm talking about like an earthly kingdom. Like, could you just approach the king sitting on his throne?
Just try to do that with Donald Trump.
Yeah, right.
I'm here to see the president.
Yeah, hey, I'm just going to walk in and, hey, I'm just here to see Donald. Yeah, me and Donald, we're tight, right? They'd be like, no, you're not. Yeah, right. But if you approach the king, you were dead unless you were invited, right? You had to be invited to approach the king. Because the throne, again, represents authority. It represents, the sovereignty. And it's meant to, the throne was really meant to magnify the gap between the king and the people, right? It was in an earthly sense, the throne was intended to bring fear and to magnify the king, to magnify that gap between the king and his people. So.
Yeah, and usually, Brother John, just to put that in perspective, the throne did not sit on the floor.
Right, it was elevated. Right.
Even in a tent.
Yeah.
Even when they moved it around,
Yep.
like in battle, the throne that went to
Yep.
battle, that throne was usually 4 to 6 feet in the Roman
Right.
world. 4 to 6
So you're not looking down or even eye level. You're looking up to the king.
You're below
Right.
his feet.
Right. Yes. And that's exactly what it's meant to do, right? So, so the author in Hebrews puts two words together, and I mentioned this in my prayer this morning. I don't know if you caught it, the final prayer. He puts together two words that usually don't go together: throne and grace, right? He says that we can approach the throne of grace. All right, so this is, we as believers, we don't approach a God who is indifferent to us, to our weaknesses. He's not impatient, doesn't or struggle. He's not impatient or struggle. But we approach a God whose Son walked in our path, like here on earth as a human, experienced fear, and experienced pain and suffering. But what is his throne defined by here? Grace, right? Not condemnation, not judgment. Power, authority, or even symbolic, something of a symbolic nature. And so, you know, I mentioned this, I mean, probably every week I say something like this on Sunday mornings, that you don't have to clean yourself up to come to God. Why? Because it's impossible. You could never clean yourself up in order to come to God. Like, as clean as you could get your life would still not qualify you to come into God's presence. But, you know, what about those who have grown up in, especially in like performance-driven environments in church? You know, like you've got to, you know, look a certain way, act a certain way. You got to do certain things, not do certain things. How does that affect our understanding of the throne of grace?
I'm going to give you an example from lunch today. Ian was very gracious and bought my lunch today. I'm going to brag on it. But we went out to eat, and there was a girl, and she had a very vulgar tattoo on her neck and vulgar tattoos on her arm. And you know, I was looking at her, and I had an opinion. And when she was fixing my food, she said, "Did y'all just come to church?" I said, "Yeah, we did." That kind of caught me off guard. And she said, "Was it good?" Caught me off guard again. She said, "Where do y'all go to church?" I said, "Coolidge Baptist Church." She said, "Oh, my church is Enon Baptist Church." And she said, I like it a lot. And that hit me.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of was here.
Yeah, right.
I had her here.
Just because of the way she looked. And should she have had a vulgar tattoo?
Yeah.
No, but who knows when she got it?
Yeah.
You know, that could have been from a, you know, previous life.
And where's the grace?
Right,
And
right,
who's on the throne?
right,
I kind of put myself there.
right.
I kind of put myself there.
And Enon is a smaller and more country church than us. And but yet she's there. She goes like she's, and so yeah, that that's true.
What I'm getting at is, if we kind of keep Jesus off the throne,
Yeah,
we always put ourselves there. If he's not,
yeah, right.
and that means we put everybody else somewhere below.
Down below us, right?
And so that was, you know, it was wrong.
Yeah. And, you know, so because I think some of us who have grown up, especially, you know, like in, you know, just maybe a heavy-handed kind of environment or whatever, we tend to think more, you know, we wouldn't want to admit it, but we do think that way. But, yeah, I mean, she has the same access to the Father as I do, right? So I'm going to actually jump ahead in my notes. We're going to skip a couple sections here because I was going to talk about some of the lament psalms, but we're running out of time. But I want to talk about the distinction, because Brother Jim brought this up, between enslaving fear and trusting, like a lament, which we're skipping over the lament psalms. That was going to kind of help set us up for that, but I think you'll understand. Because Hebrews 2:15 talks about fear. And it says this, those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. So look at what he's talking about here. What is he's talking about? The slavery is not the sensation of fear or the experience of being afraid. The slavery is in the fear's power to control us. Because what does fear do? It drives it, yeah, or it drives you to something, or, in my case, a lot of times, it paralyzes me. It doesn't really drive me anywhere. It just causes me to stop, which is just as bad, right, as driving somebody to, you know, in a certain way. Because our fear controls us, and we often become really governed by our fears, right? And so it's really not us making decisions often when we're fearful. What is fear? Fear is making the decisions for us. And so he does, when Jesus comes and when Jesus delivers his people, he delivers them not just by removing us from all difficulties of life. In fact, Jesus said, you will have trouble in this world. But what did he say next? But take heart, because I've overcome the world. Yeah, right. And take heart because I've overcome the world, right? So he doesn't remove difficulty. He doesn't promise a easy life. He doesn't promise us a fearless life. What does he do? Yeah.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the
Shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me.
But he's in the, you don't get to
Right.
go around the valley,
Right. You're going through the valley of death,
but with him.
but with Jesus. Right. And so he promises to be with us through our difficulties and providing help, like we talked about a minute ago, by allowing us to go through to him, through approaching the throne of grace with boldness. Right? So, all right, so there are two kinds of fear. Enslaving fear is a fear that has become controlling. It's become, it governs you, it controls you, it drives you, and it keeps us away from God. It oftentimes produces silence in our life, like, causes us to kind of either withdraw or isolate or just freeze and not do anything. So enslaving fear is, I can't go to God like this. I have to get better first. I have to resolve this. And so then what happens? We never go. Right. We just continue to wait because it never gets better. And then what happens oftentimes is we start to drift. So, but there's a trusting lament. So trusting lament is fear that's been brought to God. So it's fear, right? It's still fear, but what's the difference? You what? Okay, yeah. Right.
Well, I'll tell you how it is. I know everybody's not been in the military, but when you're training sometimes or doing things, you got to do things you're not comfortable with, and it can be life or death. But if the guy next to you,
Yeah.
sergeant major, he's like, hey, 2 tours, done this,
Yeah.
stick with me.
Right.
I'm afraid, but I'm able
But you're with somebody who's been there before.
and it gives you
Right.
the ability to do what you need to do because he's there.
Right.
And it does make all the difference. If you're going to war and somebody's got 2 tours under their belt, that changes things.
Yeah.
If it's me and you going, and
Right.
we're
You're going to think about that much differently.
going to look around and say, what now?
Right.
But
Right.
the sergeant major says, this now. This now.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you
Right.
change.
It's fear that we look at through a different lens. Rather than letting it control us, we submit it to God. And so trusting says, okay, I'm afraid, I'm fearful, I don't understand what's happening, but I trust you anyway. And it goes back to what Jesus prayed in the garden. Again, he said, Father, if possible, let this cup pass from me, not as I will, but as you will. Was Jesus showing a lack of faith or a failure of faith?
Actually more.
Yeah. How so? Right.
This is in your hands.
Right.
I trust your plan.
Right.
That's the greatest faith that exists in the whole Bible.
Right.
In my opinion.
That was about the most honest prayer that could have ever been prayed. Jesus, the Son of God, he knew what was happening, what what was to come, and he knew why he was going to do it. But yet he still prayed, if it's possible, if there's any other way. But he understood that, ultimately, so anyway, so in other words, Jesus wasn't rebelling against God. He wasn't rebelling against God's plan, right? He was just being real. He was being human. And so the goal of the Christian life isn't to just stop being afraid. It's to be like this. I forget who said this. I wrote it down as one pastor said this. The goal of the Christian life in seasons of fear is not to stop being afraid. It's to be afraid in the right direction, toward God, not away from Him. All right, so we already talked about the garden here, so I'll just skip over that. But let's see. All right, so just really quick in closing. So fear then doesn't disqualify us from coming to the throne of grace. In fact, it says that we come in what? Time of need. So, we don't come after our need. We don't come when, it's gone away, or we don't even come when it's like we're full of faith and, where it's like we've left all fear behind, and so now I can come to the throne of grace. Right? We can come to the grace in our time of need, right now, not before, not after, but in our time of need. So, oftentimes we functionally act the opposite way. Right? We know in our head, like, we can come to God, but we act as if we can't. So,
Well, John, the best example to me is always coming boldly. Has always been blind Bartimaeus.
yeah,
He's over. The crowd says,
yeah.
"Hush."
Just, stay.
He's crying out, and they say, "Hey, hush!" And it says he cried out the louder, "Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me." Hush, hush. Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. He got louder in his time of need because he said, "Hey,
Yeah,
you're
right.
the one from hell.
Yeah,
This is my time of need. You're passing by. There's people on the way, but I'm going to cry out until you notice me." And, he wasn't ashamed. He wasn't afraid. He said, "This is the Son of God. You can help.
yeah,
I'm coming to you
yeah,
boldly.
right.
I'm declaring my faith."
And sometimes we have a tendency to try to kind of sanitize our prayers, clean them up, like make it sound like we have more faith than we really do, or, don't include the parts that we're embarrassed by. But like Bartimaeus, I mean, that was just a gut level, honest prayer. Like, he was like, I need you. I need your touch, your healing, right? We don't have to clean up. We can be honest with God. We can come to Him honestly, because in the lament psalms, the psalms are we talked about these back several sessions ago. We went through some of the lament psalms, right? What are the lament psalms? What are they doing? They're lamenting. They're crying. They're, my God, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel from my soul and have trouble in my heart all the day? But were any of the psalmists rebuked for any of those prayers? No. You're right. They end in trust. Right. Right. I'm trying to remember the psalm. This is just off the top of my head because it's Psalm 42, I think, when he's like, anyway, I don't know. Well, here, we'll look it up because it's a good one. That's a good.
My tears have been day and night.
Yeah.
Food. My enemies continually taunt me, saying, "Where is this
Or,
God of
yeah.
yours?" My heart is breaking as I remember how it used to be. I walked among the crowds of worshipers, leading a great
right. But I will trust in God.
Now I'm deeply discouraged, but
Right.
I will remember you.
Yeah,
You
when I
from Mount
from
Hermon,
land
the source of the Jordan, from the land of Mount Mizar. I heard the tumult of the raging seas, but each day the Lord pours his unfailing love upon me, and through each night I sing his songs, praying to the God who gives me life. O God, my rock, I cry, why have you forgotten me? Why must I wander around in grief, oppressed by my enemies? They scoff, where is this God of yours? Why am I discouraged? Why is my heart sad? I will put my hope in God. I will praise him again, my Savior and my God.
Yep. See, so I mean, man, that's an honest prayer right there. I mean, but yeah, he comes. But I will trust in God. All right. So I'm just going to make this point really quick because it's an important point to make. I don't want to miss it. We've only got we're actually pretty much out of time. But remember, who is Hebrews written to? Yeah, saved Jews. Right? Huh? Jews, right? Not saved Jew, right? Just saved Jews. In other words, he's writing to a community of believers, right? That's important, all right? He's not just writing to individuals. It's a corporate letter, and so he's encouraging and commanding and encouraging believers together. And so just one quick just point is that, sometimes we can be surrounded by people, but yet still feel like we're suffering and lonely. But that's why God gave us the church, so that we don't have to experience, we don't have to go through these things, this anxiety, the fear, the trials. We don't have to go through those things alone. We need each other. And so, and he uses the same word, sympathize, in chapter 10:34 to talk about what the community had done for those imprisoned believers, like we talked about earlier. That they sympathized with them and they ran toward them rather than running away from them, which then made the sympathy of Christ even more tangible and even more present. All right, so this means that the community of believers in our fear isn't, the purpose isn't to provide all the answers. Like, again, like when I was sitting across from that young mother, I had to tell myself, I don't have all the answers. All right? What was I there for? To provide presence, to sit with her, to listen to her, to sympathize with her, to cry with her, just to stay in the room, right? Sit on the couch for as long as she needed, and to try to comfort her in her grief. And so, So my point is that remember that this was written to the community of believers, and so we need each other. We have to rely on each other, not just with cliches and meaningless statements of encouragement, but to be real with each other, to suffer with each other, to have compassion toward each other, so to help each other through with Jesus as our model. Because we're always looking to him, right? We always want to point each other to him. So that is all for tonight.